Good evening. My name is Reva Chambliss. I am the vice chair and I'll be presiding over the meeting in Chair Zelli's absence. And today is February 21st, 2024. Our call, after this call to order, the approval of the agenda, which is mainly the minutes that we need to approve and information items. So I don't expect any changes for that, so we can consider that approved. So I will ask for a motion to approve the February 7th, 2024 Metropolitan Council's Committee of the Whole minutes.
So moved. Second.
It's been moved by Peter and seconded by Councilmember Morales. With that, can we take a vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay. That motion carries. Okay, so we have 3 information items, and the first item is 2050 Parks Policy Planning Update. And we have coming up to the podium Emmett Mullin, Tracey Kinney, and Colin Kelly. Welcome.
Hi, Madam Chair, council members. I am not on your agenda, but I wanted to give some brief introductory remarks before I turn it over to my colleagues and the rest of the team today. Just some framing conversation. So today you're going to hear from several of our teams from across the council who are working on Imagine 2050. I just wanted to remind you all sort of as base setting that for Imagine 2050, we're developing this as a shared regional development guide that includes our land use chapters, our housing chapter, our parks, our transportation, and our water policies all in one document. Today, you're going to be hearing updates from parks, from housing, and from transportation. At a future council meeting, you'll hear updates from water resources and from land use. So you'll get a full mix of them. We can't do them all in one day, it's a lot. But we do want to be sure that you know that more is coming in the future. So just as some base setting too, just some reminders that your endorsed regional vision is a prosperous, equitable, and resilient region with abundant opportunities for all to live, work, play, and thrive. So that's what all of our work is driving toward. And then our shared regional goals on the right-hand side of the slide there in front of you today around our region being equitable and inclusive, our communities are healthy and safe, our region is dynamic and resilient, that we lead on addressing climate change, and that we're protecting and restoring natural resources. So you'll see our teams orienting their work around these goals today. These are all shared goals, and with that, I will stop talking and turn it over to our colleagues and let the show go on.
Thanks, Lisa. Good afternoon, Chair and Council members. I'm Emmett Mullin, the Regional Parks Manager. I am very pleased to be here today. I just wanted to give you a little peek under the hood. I did speak with the other plan leads for this presentation, and we are roughly talking about maybe a 30-ish minute presentation for parks, including discussion, housing, and then maybe a little bit more for transportation, more like 40 to 60 minutes. But that is, of course, your prerogative. We're going to jump in and give you an update on the regional parks policy work. Here's a picture that you've probably seen a few times, but it's our timeline for the planning process for the regional parks policy plan. And we are really in the middle of things right now. We are in the mix. You can see a green box there under the word execution, and we are executing. It is a time of writing right now. And we are shooting to have our 60% drafts ready for your review around May. Let's just say in May, but so that is the draft. The 2 bars at the bottom are just meant to say, first, coordination with other council areas. That is really happening, as you folks know, and with your assistance. And then the bottom grayish bar, it just speaks to the ongoing engagement that is going on right now. Here is one form of engagement that park staff is doing with our regional park implementing agency partners. We have 8 work groups, and there are 3 very active ones right now. Numbers 5, 6, and 7, strategic sustainable funding, recreation activities and facilities, and climate and natural systems. And we're just getting ready to launch the trails system coordination. And there's just, have I said a lot going on? This is a very busy slide, and I will slowly walk through it, and I'll return to this slide several times during this presentation. But let me just break it down to you, because we really want you to focus your attention on that middle row of draft parks objectives. The top row are those 5 cross-cutting regional goals that you folks set the bar at. So that's the top of the framework, and everything else is flowing from that. The draft parks objectives are next. And then we just put in the existing parks policies here. So this is the regional parks policy plan. This is what exists today. And we're going to show you how that has evolved. The 5 draft parks objectives, I just want to go through them once with you. Fostering equity and belonging is our first objective. Connecting people with community, natural and cultural landscapes to better support people's physical, mental, and emotional well-being. The second one is really about the infrastructure, take care, but Robert doesn't like that. Excuse me, Councilmember Lilligren does not like that word, so we changed it to take care of infrastructure, so we're calling it take care of what we have. Yeah, we're done with infrastructure. Reinvest in existing regional parks and trails to maintain and enhance visitor experiences. The third objective is around meeting future needs. So we want to meet the growing demand for regional parks and trails, which is significant, 69 million visits in 2022, through strategic and timely land acquisition and development. The fourth objective is around adapting and mitigating. This is largely that climate goal that you folks have set. So increasing the region's resilience to climate change by adapting land management practices and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, in the regional parks and trails. We're also referring the regional parks and trails system as the Swiss Army knife of climate mitigation and adaptation. Finally, protecting and restoring. This is just our bread and butter. Protect and restore natural systems to safeguard the well-being of all living things. So those are the 5 draft objectives that we're really flowing from your goals and now into policies and actions. Now I turn it over to Colin to talk a little bit about some of the engagement that we've been having recently.
Thanks, Emmett. Colin Kelly, Planning Analyst in the Regional Parks Unit here. And what I'm going to do is share a little bit about what we've heard from some key stakeholders. And first I'll start with the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission, who I believe you're familiar with, and then I'll say a little bit about our Regional Park Implementing Agency. So starting with MPOSC, as we sometimes refer to them, earlier this month and a few times prior, we engaged with them on draft parks objectives that you just heard about from Emmett. So the input and the feedback that they provided to us included a range of ideas that we've got here for you. First, creating flexible regional standards for community engagement, including expectations to engage people outside of the service area or jurisdiction in which they operate to provide continuity between projects. Also, promoting consistent wayfinding and signage across the system for visitor navigation. Creating a new policy or a set of actions around communication and marketing to promote public awareness of the regional parks and trails system. Creating a sustainable approach to funding the system. Commissioners asked, can we achieve what's currently included in the system plan? And by when? Commissioners and our council member liaison also encouraged staff to address water quality and availability and posed the question, what is the best way to inform people of issues like PFAS? Finally, Commissioners encouraged staff to rethink regional trails as more than just a place to bike. They suggested more park-like amenities could be provided in corridors that have more space. I also mentioned regional park implementing agency partners. Well, we met with them last month and we met with them last week as well. So I'll tell you a little bit about both of them with a focus on last month. We delved into similar discussions as those we just had with MPOSC, focusing on individual draft parks and trails objectives. With regard to equity or foster equity and belonging, we heard implementing agencies say that we should continue streamlining the equity analysis and public engagement requirements to strengthen tribal relationships, and in some locations, consider tribal co-management of parks and trails, and continue to decriminalize park ordinances. I should note that during last week's implementing agency partner meeting, there was a robust discussion of tribal co-management, with some agencies expressing a preference for a broader Indigenous reconciliation approach. In relation to the system plan, or existing Chapter 3 of our Regional Parks Policy Plan, we heard some ideas for new classifications, including the possibility of a cultural landscape or cultural site classification, as well as a natural system or environmental open space classification. These topics were also discussed at length during last week's agency partner meeting. Agencies expressed some support for the new classification ideas, but also suggested council staff consider them within the context of existing classifications like special recreation features and park reserves. There was also quite a bit of input on the related climate topics of mitigation and adaptation. We heard that we should promote regional trails as a greenhouse gas reduction strategy and recognize regional trails as the arterial backbone of an active transportation network. Agencies also suggested using trail corridors to protect and connect habitat and wildlife, and to create multi-jurisdictional climate action plans. Regional park implementing agencies also shared their ideas with us on natural systems and recreation activities and facilities. With regard to natural systems, we heard implementing agencies say that we should emphasize lands with restoration potential, including former industrial landscapes, to designate new regional parks and trails in low service and low wealth areas, and in spaces that have a higher concentration of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and to convert abandoned railroad corridors to regional trails where possible. Finally, with regard to recreation activities and facilities, or equitable recreation activities and facilities, we heard implementing agencies say that we should consider expanding allowable activities and facilities to meet emerging needs, and to balance such flexibility with the desire to retain our natural system foundation. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Emmett to move us into some emerging policy space and kick off a discussion of everything you've just heard.
Alrighty, I return to this slide, which I've already covered, to be honest. But now my point is to tell you what I think Councilmember Wolf has said a couple times. We've got a really strong regional parks policy plan right now. She didn't say don't screw it up, but I think that was, but we really do need to build from it, because it's good, and it has been really constructed through dialogue and engagement over many years. So that's really my point here. But now I go to an even messier slide, and again, I'm going to just take time with this. This is really our second to last slide. The top line is those 5 parks objectives that I've already covered, so I won't cover them. But now we have 2 additional rows. The first is existing and emerging parks policies, and then the second row is, the second row is existing and emerging parks policies, and then the third row is existing and emerging parks actions. So where does all this input that we're hearing lead? Like, that's the big question we're trying to ask. So we think that this is where it is taking us. So a few important orientations to this. The black text in the second and third row means that it's existing in the existing plan, and the green text means that it's new. So new and emerging policy ideas. So here are just a few observations on this slide. Chapter 3, so it says 3 in parens under system plan. The system plan is chapter 3. Sorry, it's detailed, but what's in the system plan? It's our existing parks and trails, it's our planned parks and trails, and it's our search area parks and trails. So it's really the sort of foundation of the regional park system. That's what makes up the regional park system. So that's super important to us. Now I'm dropping down to the existing and emerging parks actions underneath that system plan column. And what Colin said earlier is exactly what we've been hearing. Should we create a cultural landscapes classification? I'm thinking about Indian Mounds Regional Park in St. Paul, like that has really been transformed into a cemetery. Is that a place of recreation? No, it is not. But is it a place of reflection, education? Yes. So cultural landscape, maybe. Another thing we've been talking about is this idea for an environmental or a natural systems classification where recreation wouldn't be excluded, but maybe this would be an idea that, the way some of the park agencies were talking about it is it'd be like tendrils of natural resource corridors that could be connectors between parks and trails. So kind of an intriguing idea. We will come back with these ideas with a proposal later. It's not a today thing, but we are talking about it. Now I'm going to take these next 3 boxes that have a dashed line around them, and that used to be called Chapter 4, which is around siting and acquisition, siting or locating new parks and trails. We think that's really more of a strategy than like a policy. So we're thinking about backing the siting and acquisition into more the action level. And then we think that we're establishing this more natural systems protection framework that would contain siting and acquisition, but more at the strategy level. And we also want to better understand how the region is being served with our parks and trails, identifying gaps in our existing parks and trails system. So that's one thing we want to do. Do we have the right geographic balance? That's a big question that we always return to when we do that siting and acquisition process with our park agency partners. The other thing the dash box indicates is just the close relationship that these 3 policy areas, natural systems, adaptation, and mitigation, have among each other. We think that this new emerging clump of ideas will take us in a good direction, and it's very much at the heart of what our climate and natural systems work group is discussing. Like, this is one of the ideas coming out of that. They don't want us to create sort of false separation between these ideas, so is there a way to talk about them as a group? And we think there is. I'm going to keep just walking down these columns. The next group goes to planning. That's the current chapter 5. It's called master planning, but we've changed it to long range planning. And this is really rock solid. It's kind of a fundamental thing that the council does with our park implementing agencies. And but we think that there are some real opportunities to streamline our requirements, and we're going to work on that. The park agencies would welcome that because there's a lot of duplication and overlap between, like, we have an equity analysis requirement now that's really been a great step forward, but there's a super strong relationship with the public engagement expectations, and we can really pull that together into a simpler and clearer expectation. Chapter 6, so going down to system protection right now. This will remain largely intact. This is a critical council function. Like anytime we invest any state or regional money into the system, like we put funding restrictions on it, and it gives a high level of protection. So that's something that isn't really going to change too much. Chapter 7, which is the last column, really getting there, as Colin called it, equitable recreation activities and facilities. Is this going to change a lot? You know, I think it's fundamentally reinforcing what's in the current chapter, but it's recognizing that we gotta change, that we gotta continue to evolve, and we really need to meet the needs that are emerging through our engagement activities. So this will require us to be more flexible with the range of facilities and activities allowed. Then the bottom bars, I just want to say, the first one talks about sustainably fund regional parks and trails. Our current chapter 8 is all about the finance programs, and the idea that these funding programs, well, you know, this is one part of funding the system. The locals certainly funded a lot, as well as state and the region. But that's really running across the bottom because it funds all aspects of the system, with the exception of maybe daily maintenance. And then finally, the bottom thing is just it's some of the themes that we've heard over and over again, particularly from our Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commissioners, around building awareness of the system, increasing visibility, increasing the importance of habitat protection, recognizing just the fundamental backbone of the system is the natural resource base and the natural system base. So I think that's enough for this chapter. I did want to just mention that number 9 in the bottom right-hand corner points us to a work plan. We want to include a work plan in the parks policy so that it points to the work to be done, and we'll set up those expectations through that work plan. And here we are. Thanks for listening to Colin and me, and we really, are open for any questions, advice, or comments.
Oh, thank you, Councilmember Lovelace.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. And I'll probably have more to say in a minute, but just to clarify, so this new chapter 9 that points to this sort of implementation and an action plan, does that not exist today?
We have a work plan in the current Parks Policy Plan. This chapter 9 is basically one page. It's the last page of the document, and it just lays out expectations. We have largely fulfilled this. Not bragging, but we have made a lot of progress, and there's still more stuff to do. But that would be the holding space for a lot of the stuff that we're just setting up expectations with your guidance and also advice.
Right, thanks. I think that's smart. A plan, needs implementation. And maybe I'll just say I have a couple comments. So I thought the approach that you're taking in the sort of modifications here and setting up siting and acquisition as more of a strategy than a policy plan area, I think that makes sense. I like how you've related to the new sort of topics of natural systems adaptation and mitigation. The idea of a cultural landscape or something I think is really intriguing, and I think is kind of consistent with growing interest in sort of the re-identification of maybe sacred sites, or as I just remember back, this is years ago, but Minneapolis Park and Rec Board was doing some design work around Benay-McCoska. It was right around the name change time. There was some, they wanted to indigenize some of the features there. So they were out in the Native community, and they came to Metropolitan Urban Indian Directors, and I remember a young emerging leader, they were talking about maybe ceremonial spaces, and there's a lot of conversation about that along the river, and where can people get access to the actual water, touch the water for ceremonial reasons. And this one young emerging leader said, well, this is really all our land. Why should we have to designate certain spots? This is really all our land. We should be able to have ceremony anywhere. And that might not be practical, but I thought it was an excellent point. So I feel like that is gonna start happening whether we want it to or not. And so I feel might as well get on board and start making space for that in comprehensive planning, that sort of cultural landscape piece. And I think that's it, yeah, thank you, thanks.
Good comments, thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, years ago, they did an equity analysis on how far you had to go to get to regional parks for different parts of the region, and they found that the core actually has the best coverage because of all of the Minneapolis park system, and St. Paul has a very significant regional park system as well. I'm a little confused as to why we would go around cleaning up industrial sites to return them or to make them into parks when we have large parts of our regional system where we have high quality natural resources but not the money to bring access to those places. I could see maybe why a city might want to do that if they have extra need for local park kind of stuff, but it seems like a bit of a stretch to take really polluted land, which normally we can't even use like our TVRA money on because it doesn't bring anything into the tax base, and that's the whole purpose of that program, is to bring polluted lands back into the tax base. Makes more sense to change those places if you want a park into a local park, or else housing next to the river in the industrial area in North Minneapolis and whatnot, rather than trying to create a natural resource-based thing in an area that is not at all suited for that because of all of the pollution and is not really eligible for cleanup funding. Can you explain why you guys are working on that?
Yeah, Councilmember Wolf and Chair and Councilmember Wolf. This was an idea that's emerged from a number of our partners, and it's recognition that, you know, some of the people when they talk about this are talking about Mississippi River shoreline, and that there are opportunities that land is becoming available to purchase it and to clean it up and to create access to the people who live in those areas. And there's opportunities to do this not everywhere. And you're right that cleaning up industrial land is a significant undertaking, but it's something that really should be done because it's like particularly along the Mississippi River. I mean, it's one of the most amazing rivers in the world. And so like that's the great opportunity. There are other areas that I think about in our regional park system, like Rice Creek North, which goes through some of the TCAP site, Bernardin Hills, that there were opportunities to leverage funding from other sources to clean it up to a recreational standard and then provide access to green space. But so I don't think I'm totally answering your question here, other than to say sometimes that's where there is opportunity and is even in a designated status, and that's where they're seeing some of the energy to go. I don't think that we'd be focusing on polluted landscapes necessarily, but as we think about where those landscapes are in connection with maybe some of our communities that we want to better serve, that there might be an opportunity to clean them up and create opportunities for recreational access. Councilmember Wolf?
I think cleaning up the riverfront and redeveloping that is a great idea. Whether it should be a regional park or whether you can use that access to bring up the value of the land near it for redevelopment and put that money into putting, absolutely, it can include public access to the river, but whether that's to be funded by the regional park system or whether that should be something local because it's more of a local benefit is something I think that is still up for debate, especially when we have large portions of our system that have no access or no programming. You know, Meesville Ravine Regional Park is a gorgeous piece of land. It's got a couple of vault toilets and some picnic shelters, and that's it, you know, for the entire regional park. So if you want to make sure that there's access everywhere and that we preserve the natural resources, I think sometimes you gotta say, you know, maybe that could be something else besides a regional park to clean up and get access to something that's already been all clear cut. Yes, absolutely, bring back access to the river, but there can be other things that are generating either housing or businesses or hotels or something that's paying taxes and leveraging that value along the river to improve the value of the properties next to the river.
Thank you, Wendy. I think you've made some really good points to take back and consider. I think once you go local, then bringing it back to regional, if there needs to be a change. I don't know what those ramifications would be, but if we don't have the questions, we can't explore it, so appreciate that. Any Councilmember Carter?
I appreciate the points that are being made too. It just leads me back to the questions about how we assess availability and access of our regional park to all of our region. And I don't know if it's always distance to the park. You know, it certainly could be square miles of park per population, which would cause you to look at things entirely different. But I think that's at the foundation of the question that you raise. And I do appreciate taking that back and sharing back with us. I know we've talked about this before, but I may not be as crystal clear on how we actually measure park access. Whether in fact we have that science, you know, what is being done nationally as we talk about that. Because before any conclusions about what is regional and what is not are drawn, you know, we should be on the same page about that. Just a comment, and I would love to hear back as we take these questions.
Well, thank you. I know that once we finish the presentations, where there are emerging or new policies or actions, you'll come back with some proposals.
Yeah.
Councilmember Pacheco.
Yes, Madam Chair, I have a quick question here, maybe a longer answer, I guess. I can see equity in almost every other slide, it's going there, but one of them says streamline equity analysis and public engagement requirements. And what are we doing today that this streamline would change?
Chair and Councilmember Pacheco, great question. The equity analysis requirement was new in 2020, and it was added to the list of existing requirements for long-range planning. And it basically says, who are the prioritized communities in the service area that you're trying to serve or better serve? Go out and talk to them. What did you learn? And then what are you doing based on what you're learning? So it's a really kind of simple-minded approach to sort of figure out where the plan can go. This equity analysis requirement stands currently independent of public engagement, partner engagement, and a few others that I can't remember right now, but of the requirements that completely overlap with that equity analysis requirement. So the idea is that we can just bring it together for a more cohesive and simplified approach to planning.
Yeah, well, actually, I like that, because sometimes when you're looking at equity here, you see piece here, and so when I look at this, I want to say, okay, there must be one strategy or one place where it all comes together, and you're saying that that's what this streamline would do.
That's the hope.
Thank you.
Councilmember Seaver.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's more of a comment, but I see a couple of things really linking up for future planning, and I really like take care of what we have as being very important. And the comment I have is I'm sure you are, but as some of these parks, you've got the data for how they're being used, some are more heavily used, and as we grow, are you projecting trends for how much more use they're gonna go? And so how are you gonna really take care of what we have to keep a good park and to have a good visitor experience if there's super pressure growth? And I just look at several parks where they're just local parks, but huge developments have grown up and parks are overrun. I mean, they're damaged, they're not being taken care of because there's so much population pressure. And so as you look at the parks that we do have, the current parks, and you look at future growth, to push into the equitable box over there to expand, allowable amenities, to really rethink what other populations could be using parks and your new parks in different ways. And I think that is what I'm hearing from my community in Washington counties. Accessibility, not everybody can walk 5 miles to go see the birds in the pond. Can you get people there a different way? Not just one at a time. I mean, so really rethink how other people can use the park. I think that's going to be very important going forward, in particular different, low vision, disabilities, all different ways. But I think both of those together, so you've got to take care of your park. You got the pressures of overuse. How can you rethink? Maybe you can't do it at all the parks, but how can you bring other people in? I mean, it's very complicated, and funding is at the source of this all, but I think we've got a lot of creative minds. And I met with the Washington County Parks people, and a lot of really good ideas came out and talking about the regional parks, of getting people into the parks and into some of the more interesting parks who are maybe less able-bodied. So I think that's critical.
Any other questions? Councilmember Carter?
Yeah, I was glad to see the equitable recreation activities and facilities, and the idea about expanding allowable amenities to allow flexibility and the rethinking of the regional trail corridors to include more than walking and biking. I currently do a lot of walking and biking myself, but I know we need use beyond that. So one of the things that I noticed was, we have a lot of great fishing piers, but we really don't have enough. And we need to, when we're expanding our park construction, we need to take a look at that. We need more, so more low-income families can have access to the fishing, and not just wealthy landowners. So, because those low-income people, they're paying taxes too. And some places where I try to get access, because I walk around. I mean, I could afford to buy a boat, do all those things, but I try to put myself in the position of a poor person, because I kind of walk through this world. And I think I'd like to fish over here, but there's no fishing pier over here. But I see all these wealthy and landowners, they have fishing piers in front of their houses. Well, we need to make sure that things are equitable as far as access, because for some of those poor families, when they go fishing, they're not doing catch and release. They're doing catch for dinner. So we need to make sure we're looking through everyone's eyes.
Councilmember Ventos?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Come on over to the east side, Councilmember, or Dr. Carter. We've got some great public fishing piers on Lake Phelan. I'm not sure if you want to eat the fish or not, but yeah,
I checked the testing
check on that first. But and that's not a slam against Lake, against Phelan at all. It's a beautiful lake. I just wanted to commend you folks and our park partners staff for the work that you did on this. Council members Lindstrom and Wolf and I are part of a group right now that are reviewing grant requests for equity grants. And I wanted to note that and this fits into chapter 9. This is where the rubber meets the road and things are being done. But I was blown away by the grant requests. And one of the things that I really appreciated in them was the emphasis on teaching skills, particularly around safety, whether it's biking or swimming, mountain biking, just a variety of things, and also the emphasis on working with members of our community who have disabilities, whether they be physical, sensory. It just was really impressive. So I wanted to note that. And as it relates to the safety piece of it, this is true through all of our Imagine 2050. We can do all the great work possible, and unless the people who live in our region are conducting themselves, and poor Jed had to listen to me carry on about this at a transportation committee meeting, but I'll do it again tonight. Unless they're biking and driving and swimming and living safely, it's pointless. We aren't going to reduce traffic deaths. We aren't going to reduce, accidents on bikes or in water. I was driving up McKnight on the east side earlier today, 2 lanes and a left turn lane in between. A car came sailing up the left turn lane, went at least 3/4 of a mile, if not a mile, before stopping long enough to turn. It probably wasn't a mile, I'm exaggerating, but it was a long ways. I don't know where this person, I'm pretty sure it was a guy, but I don't want to blame all men for this. I'm not sure where this person got driver's ed, but I know that there's no driver's ed instructor in Minnesota that teaches that as a safety technique. And so I guess my point is, and maybe it's not valid for this discussion, but I just really think the more we can emphasize safety as a part of all of our Imagine 2050, I think it's really important. Every time we talk about Imagine 2050, I do the math and figure out how old I'm gonna be if I'm still around. And it makes my bones creak. But, and if you're doing the math, I'll be almost 97, so there you go. But I'd really like to see us achieve the traffic goals by 2050 and to have fewer accidents on our trails and in our parks, in our homes, on our streets and on our transit. So whatever we can do to really emphasize safety, I think is important. Enough of that sermonette. Councilman Wolf?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to acknowledge some of the positive things that we have seen in the last parks policy plan. That changing of the attitude of going out and asking people, what do you want to do in the park? Not, here's our totally baked plan, what are your comments? But working with people to understand what they really want to do. And I think North Mississippi Regional Park is a good example of that, trying to have different levels of activity for different amounts of confidence that people have in the outdoors and stuff. They really worked hard with the community to reflect what people actually want to do in the park. I hope that we keep doing that while being mindful of that there are different kinds of parks, and city parks provide different things than regional parks. Regional parks are more like a state park, and we have to make sure we don't try to take on what other people should be doing or already are doing well, and focus on the part that we really need to protect the natural systems in our region.
Any other questions or things that you want to advise staff further? Thank you for this presentation, Emmett, Colin, and Lisa for prepping us. I really appreciated starting with the regional development guide and the goals. which included the equity and the safety and the resilience and the climate change and the natural systems. I'm hoping that as we go back to these categories of policies, that we tie them into our regional development guide and we look at the cross-cutting goals and how the different policies align with each other to meet our regional development vision. So thank you very much. Next, we have our 2050 Housing Policy Plan update from Hilary Lovelace. And I also want to acknowledge that we have visitor Melissa Taphorn, the Executive Director of Washington County CEA.
Thank you so much, Chair. Today I'll be giving you an update on where we are with the housing policy plan. Some slides from Parks might look a little bit familiar to you. And I do just want to kind of name and point out that Melissa Taphorn was one of our housing policy plan technical advisory group members. So thank you so much for being here today. We'll talk a little bit about our timeline briefly, then we'll move into talking about the items of consensus that we reached within our technical advisory group. Then I'll jump right into some draft housing policy plan objectives, and I'll ask you for your input. And similar to kind of how I've presented before on the housing policy plan, I put some questions up front that you'll see again at the end. I'm curious about knowing, as part of the equity framework that y'all have already adopted, we want to make sure that we're centering those with the most to gain or lose by how well our housing policy plan responds to those most immediate and dire needs. In the second question, we only have time to go through a quick overview of what our policy directions are shaping up to be in the form of objectives in this presentation. And we want to know what details you're most interested to learn more about or what we should highlight in future presentations. I asked a similar question to this in CDC, so I'll kind of, in November, so I'll ask kind of more for folks who aren't in Community Development Committee to weigh in on that second one. So our housing policy plan timeline, we've moved past initiation and our concentrated engagement phase, and now we're in our execution or writing stage. Today actually was our first block off the calendar writing workshop for staff on this project. We're planning to complete a 60% draft alongside other policy areas within community development in May. And we're following the same generalized timeline for adoption through the close of this. Next, I want to tell you a little bit about who was in our technical advisory group, first by the numbers and then by expertise. We had 5 county staff that attended. Not every person from every county was able to make this, but we did extend invitations. We had 4 different community designations represented by city staff. 5 city staff total were part of our technical advisory group. And they included districts 5, 6, 7, 10, 11, 13, 14, and 16, and urban, urban edge, suburban, and suburban edge communities. And we'll talk a little bit more about rural communities later in this presentation. We had 3 developers spanning from affordable to market rate developers, developers who are focused more on single family and rental, both developers who focused on, and some developers who focused specifically on ownership. We had 2 consultants, one of which will probably be writing a lot of the comprehensive plans for cities in the coming decade. We had 2 nonprofit advocates, one person from Minnesota housing staff, and of course, as always, Metro Cities is hanging out with us when we're doing fun stuff, thinking about the future. We, more than that, had folks who were experts in local planning, comprehensive plan writing, homelessness, green building design, anti-displacement, housing communications, affordable housing development, and a fair housing expert. So we really tried to ask people both intentionally over the course of different career stages. So some people kind of in the earlier stages of their career, some folks seasoned veterans and in senior positions in their workflow, and folks who had a really broad area of expertise. And you'll see that reflected in some of our items of consensus. You can kind of feel them being pulled in different directions from different viewpoints. We intentionally kind of tried to gather intergenerational and different experiences among TAG members in our group. And I think that also kind of shows a little bit. So we held 5 required meetings for TAG members and 2 optional meetings based on items of interest that came up in early discussion in our first 2 meetings. Those optional meetings were, what do regional partnerships in housing look like? Mostly focused on our county and city level partners. And the second was focused on anti-displacement. So we met in October and November to get things rolling. Then we met in December to talk specifically about affordability limits. We brought a lot of data and information to that conversation. Got a lot of great feedback on how to consider affordability specifically for ownership in a way that we don't currently. Then we focused in on need and what adjustment factors we should have for need as we're allocating need across local governments within the region. And just last week, we had our last meeting talking about housing consistency within comprehensive plans at the local level in the next planning decade. The historical way in which we have kind of checked consistency is with land guided for affordable housing, making sure that each community has enough land uses with high enough minimum densities such that it's hypothetically possible that that could support the need for each community in that planning decade. And the need is a share of household growth expected. So that's both people moving in and out of homes within our region. You can think of kids moving out on their own for the first time, people getting divorced, roommates saving up enough money to live on their own, and also people moving into the region. Any quick questions on kind of these 3 topic areas before we continue on? I'll keep rolling. So these were typed live time. I felt a little bit like an auctioneer while I was doing this. So please excuse that these are a little bit roughly worded. I'm happy to kind of represent the spirit of them a little bit more as we go through them. So one of the items that we came to consensus on, and we found consensus by a system of voting with hands called Fist to 5, where Fist is like, absolutely not, I cannot support this, you know, like even in base concept. 5 is like, I am enthusiastically supporting this. 2 is, I could maybe support this, but we have to change something. And 3 is, I support this, but I want to talk about it a little bit later. So we didn't find an item of consensus unless everyone present gave a 3 or higher. So the first one was continued policy and funding priority on deeply affordable housing, 30% of AMI or below, and they wanted to specify that this is a top 5 priority. Because there were so many different types of expertise in the room, some folks were like, well, that's not my top priority. Second, they wanted to specify that this was more of a policy goal, that wealth building opportunities for low-income households with a focus on ending racial disparities, acknowledging that a majority of rental households of color fall into 40 to 80% AMI range should be emphasized. So ownership and a shared ownership focus was a large theme that arose out of TAG meeting discussions and how important that was to several of our TAG members. Next was asking us, I think, more for clarity in the future. Differentiate what can be a land use and market-driven solution versus a policy goal that is supported by government funding and intervention. Basically saying, let's focus on the things that we really need to be involved in to fix, and let other things that we are less involved in solve themselves. We We were requested to be very clear about any future alternate measures of affordability, why we created it, when it is used, and publicize it in a way to not confuse anyone. We want to make sure that if we're talking about a different measure to better reflect the experience of residents in our region, that it not confuse development within our region. That was a big takeaway. They were like, this is meaningful that we do this, but we really want to make sure that it does not make our jobs harder in meeting the needs of low-income residents in our region. The third one here, the Metropolitan Council focusing on their own investments for anti-displacement and policy is a good first step. Follow up with best practices for local level investments. This one comes mostly from our discussion at an optional tag meeting where there is a greater focus on what we're kind of currently doing internally as the council and taking that as a first step. Our work with the Blue Line Anti-Displacement Work Group, of course, kind of being a well-known example of that type of work. And that they identified that kind of our next step from there would be offering local level best practices similar to what we might use at the regional level for local governments that are interested and have political support for that type of work. Last on this slide, cities were interested in receiving localized median incomes, meaning what is the median income for people who live in my city or my district, but not using that as a consistency measure for regional housing policy. So more of a data request. Everyone in the metro should have housing that is stable and affordable at 30% of their income to them as a general statement. Consider housing infrastructure as part of an interconnected ecosystem people need to thrive in our region, and then a long list of things that are connected to what helps people thrive in our region. And exploring the use of midpoint densities for tracking local community consistency through in the 2031 to 40 decade. I put that an asterisk on that one because that's one that we definitely need to spend more time talking to city staff about before taking any like deep action on. And then last but certainly not least, another one that we want to talk to city staff more across the region before we get too deep is to create an alternate measure of affordability, but keep that better reflects the reality of residents in the region, but keep the HUD standard for funding, just to keep things simpler. So kind of related to the one we talked about before. I am going to, oh, yeah.
Councilmember Wolf, can you go back? The
More.
midpoint densities, what does that mean?
So midpoint densities currently, everyone wants to know. Midpoint densities currently are the measure that we use for land use consistency. Good, I'm getting nods. And we have historically used the minimum of a density instead of the midpoint for this. A midpoint, considering that land use was between 20 and 100 units per acre, just as an easy math example, would be whatever is between 20 and 100, and I can't do math that fast on the spot.
60.
Thank you. I knew somebody was doing the math while I was saying it out loud. So that's looking more at that. There are some cities that have really restrained developable land who during our conversations in the tag kind of were like, we do not have the political support to have higher minimums, but we do have the political support to build affordable housing. And it's very difficult for some people to stay in housing consistency because of that. So the question I kind of asked myself, as we were getting this item of consensus is, are we trying to have higher minimum densities, or are we trying to support the development of affordable housing in our region? And what better reflects that? So I don't have an answer on how that looks right now because I placed these in this presentation Thursday evening before they were due for posting on the website. But does that kind of help you understand a little bit more? Okay. Amazing. So moving into what we're thinking about writing in the regional development guide and the structure and the phrasing. We are very lucky to pull from the wisdom of water planners at the council who developed this model of 3 Ps. We really like it too. So provide, plan, and partner. I have a couple of examples up here of work that we either already do or are planning to do in the very near term as examples of provide and partner. Provide, obviously something that we have a lot more control and ownership over, and it's more direct. And partner being something that is less directly within our control, but that we have a lot of influence in with our partners across the region. So next, I'm going to bring you through some of our draft housing policy plan objectives. Cultural connection and well-being. Oh, sorry, before I go into this, a note that we used both information from our technical advisory group, which we just talked a lot about. Last time I presented to CDC, I brought forth a lot of engagement themes. We tried to include those here in our objectives as well. And looking at past objectives to kind of get an idea of what things should look like. So we have cultural connection and well-being, kind of as like a title, and then as a description. Everyone has access to homes, not just housing. At the policy level, increase the ability for residents to keep their homes, amenities, health, and our sense of belonging in the neighborhood. And an example of one action, not the only action related to this objective, would be prioritizing cultural connections and funding criteria. As a second one, equity, which we have given 9 million different names, and probably equity will not be it, is repair historic and ongoing injustice in housing practices and outcomes. Policy-wise, limit the effect of historical injustices through reparative and community-centered action, and limit future disparities by shifting current policies to protect communities whose disparities are the largest. And then an example of an action on the bottom. Environment. Housing in our region is resilient to climate change impacts and furthers environmental justice. An example of a policy for that objective could be support the development and maintenance of homes to create a climate resilient future, more focused on the actual homes than the siting and location of homes, which might live a little bit more in our land use policy. We'll go backwards on this slide, right to left. Decency. Affordable housing is built to a high standard and maintained safe and accessible for all residents. Supporting and incentivizing development and preservation as part of that, making sure that residents have a safe, dignified, and healthy place to live. Options to own or rent. Rental and ownership options are available to all households regardless of income. And an example for policy of that is support and incentivize development, preservation, and maintenance of affordable housing units of all types that reflect the true cost burden and set up types of tenure that reflect the true cost burden experienced by residents. The heart of what we're trying to get at here is that ownership is not the only way to have a dignified place to live. And in our current system, there's a lot pushing it in that direction. That both owning and renting are great options and that ownership is available to more people. Last two, we did 7 instead of 5. Fair housing and geographic choice. People regardless of ability, age, financial status, race, and family size can live in a community that they choose. This is largely related to fair housing work that the council has supported for a long time, making sure people can live next to amenities that they think are the most important or serve their household the best. And last but definitely not least, stability. Safe, affordable, and dignified places to live are available to everyone, especially those experiencing housing insecurity and homelessness. And in this area, we don't have as much direct authority, but we have a lot of opportunity to do things like participate, continue participating with the Metropolitan Interagency Council on Homelessness and support housing efforts of groups that assist people in substance abuse recovery. Before we jump right back into my questions, I just wanted to loop back a little bit on what we heard last time we went to CDC, make sure we're hearing you right, and how we're planning to respond or how we have responded so far. We're planning to partner with engagement staff to revisit some of the organizations and communities that we spoke to this past summer, and making sure that we heard them right and they see their preferences and values reflected in a very early version of our plan. Last time we had a large conversation about safety, and we've tried to include that in 2 of our objectives that we've written in here. Both stability and decency. We were asked for some comparisons between Thrive and Imagine, and we used this format to show data to our technical advisory group in 2 of our last meetings. But we are planning to bring that to the housing work group before we bring that kind of comparison to open council meetings. Then we were asked to talk to TAG about wealth building, and they were very excited about promoting ownership and had a lot of different ideas. Anti-displacement work is critical, continue gathering feedback from residents and city staff. The TAG organically brought up an interest on anti-displacement, and we're working on identifying the council's role within anti-displacement in Imagine 2050. And the last item we heard is that rural staff should be reflected in this work. And what we're realizing is that not smaller local governments do not have the time to send a person to 5 required meetings. And so although we deeply appreciate the participation of our county partners in those areas of the region, we just need to go out to those communities and talk directly to those staff. So we're planning to make up for that miss in the spring. And this is a picture from our engagement this last summer. And we just wanted you to know that we're planning to work with the Art and Policy Initiative in order to loop back and make sure that we're accountable for the engagement that we've already done and that we're hearing people correctly in this work. So that brings me back to our discussion points. Thank you.
Thank you, Hilary. Do we have any questions? Okay, Councilmember Carter.
Just because it's the last thing on my mind. You spoke earlier about the process you're going through and about engagement. I just saw a picture of the community engagement. I would ask, that must be a representative picture of community engagement. It was not the one. Right. Exactly. I know you talked a lot about the tag, but can you talk a little more about the various community engagement opportunities that you have been able to have in the process of this work?
Thank you, Chair, Councilmember Tony Carter. We reached out to a lot of different organizations. We met with 2 different organizations that serve people with disabilities. We spoke to probably 4 or 5 unique classrooms of adult English language learners, which is actually where the picture we saw earlier came from, in Maplewood, but pulled a lot of residents from Washington County. And we worked with one native serving organization, a handful of, I already said disability services, didn't I? That's what I'm remembering right now. But in all of that work, we engaged more than 250 people. We also worked with a group of youth at the Minnesota Islamic Center in Anoka County. So we're also listening to the work of other policy areas that are leading community engagement. So we've been present at a lot of the land use policy engagement items too.
And you mentioned that you're going back to make sure that you heard what you heard, and that when it is represented, when you share the summary of what you heard or what you're putting forward as draft plans, that you'll receive acknowledgement from those whose input is being captured. And I do appreciate that. I also want to make certain that there is a place where people can go to see what is being teed up. That's on our website, that there is promotion of that information so that we get eyes that we have not yet had on this topic. And let's see, there was one more thing and I can't remember it, so I'm gonna let it go.
Thank you, very good questions. Councilmember Lilligren, Vento, and Barber.
Thanks, Chair, and I feel kind of bad because I am on CDC and we've kind of had a couple bites at this apple. And Hilary, great work and thanks for presenting it. And it kind of gets to your questions here, but it kind of steps a little out of it. A couple of slides, one was on slide 6 in the first point, differentiate what can be land use. Then one was on slide 8, the partner piece, the sort of less direct sort of impact. And I really liked what you were saying about the differentiation on slide 6. And then at the end, I didn't like it as much, kind of the direction we were going. And we had this great discussion on the development guidelines work group today that kind of touched on this as well. And part of my interest is in being really clear there. This is the regional policy plan, right? So it's not just what we can do, and I think it's important to differentiate. There are things that the council can directly impact through policy or through resource allocation, and there's a lot more need throughout the region than we could ever address. And I think for me, in these parts, it's important to really point that out. And I think the more we kind of put it into this box of what we can do, the more we're reinforcing this narrative that somehow it's the public sector that needs to solve the housing affordability and availability issues, and we can't, right? So in the partnering area, you list other public sector entities. And so for me, there's, what's the private sector? What's the employer's role? Essentially we're subsidizing their workers' housing, right? So what's their role in helping us address this? There's philanthropy. There's faith communities, which I think are an incredibly under-leveraged resource within our region. And so I feel like we need to call those out, that we can't put ourselves in a corner or paint ourselves into a corner that we're gonna somehow solve this with the public sectors, because we're not ever going to. And the more we serve that narrative, I think the more it becomes sort of self-serving. Everyone can look and point at the public sector and say, fix this. Well, we can point back. What are you gonna do? And I feel like there needs to be a space for that in our policy plan.
Yes, what are we gonna do in partnership?
Yeah.
Councilmember Vento.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Councilmember Lilligren, for bringing up the faith community. Having worked for a parish here in St. Paul for 5 years, which was the parish where Catholic Charities got its roots back in the 1800s. German immigrants were instructed by the then Archbishop to create a German parish, and the priests were instructed to create a German parish, which they did. And the parishioners at Assumption, back in the 1800s, created an orphanage for German children whose parents had died. And from that came the St. Joseph's Home for Children and Catholic Charities. So, the faith community plays a really big role in that homeless issue. The other sector that I think we ought to think about communicating with as it relates to homelessness and housing stability are our school districts. So many schools are, and not just the urban inner core schools, but greater Minnesota and outer ring suburbs are really working hard on those issues, whether it be housing or food, clothing, just the ability of kids to participate in extracurricular activities, all of those as it relates to income inequities. I recently had a conversation with an administrator from a suburban high school in a community that were I to identify it right now, you'd think, well, that's a wealthy community, really? He talked about the number of students at the high school who are homeless. And it was shocking to hear it. I was stunned. And it's the result of a lot of factors, but it's our future generation. And so are we creating just a real tough situation for ourselves looking out to imagine 2050? 26 years from now, where will those kids be?
Thank you. Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my question is, so it sounds like you've got your technical work group, which is staff from different groups by and large, and you've presented a few times to community development. But what's the connection and sort of tie through to policymakers, whether it's us, whether it's city, county leaders? Ultimately, they're the ones that we have to work with and talk about, and we'll feel the impacts. We're the ones who have to sell this and all of that. And I'm just sort of curious where that's woven into all of this and what the plan is going forward.
Chair, Councilmember Barber, I want to understand your question a little bit more. You're asking what are the areas of input for council members, or what is the plan to engage local government staff? Both?
Both, because when we ultimately go out, they're looking to us to present this, but when the local electeds and things are hearing about this, I get the question, I hear you're working on, but there's, with a small number of city and county staff involved with this, it leads a opportunity for misinterpretation as to what is going on and what we're doing and why. And so I think it's important to engage early and often, especially with some of the smaller communities who don't understand or see themselves in this.
Through the chair, thank you, Councilmember Barber. We're planning to continue a lot of direct engagement with local government staff, whether it be at the county level or at the local level. We are planning to kind of take a road trip or a road show around to more local governments that we otherwise wouldn't hear from. Also continuing to work through metro cities in partnership with them to make sure that there aren't any opportunities for misinterpretation.
Thank you. Very good questions and feedback. More to come with the proposals. I think we are ready to move on to the 2050 Transportation Policy Plan update, so we have time to hear what they have to say and give them that feedback. So we have Colin Hiniker coming up here to us.
Thank you. We'll be joined by a special guest today, unannounced. It's like at the end of a concert when they bring out that cool alternate performer. I'm Cole Hiniker, Senior Manager, Multimodal Planning and Project Manager for the 2050 TPP. I'm joined by Bethany Brandt Sargent. She's a Senior Planner in MTS. She led our policies and actions development process, so a part of the TPP, a big part of it, and a lot of engagement with our partners. So we're going to tag team that piece of the presentation today. Oh, here we go. I was about to move it on here, but that won't help. So we do have a lot of content. We have a little bit more than the last two presentations, so I hope you're all ready for soaking up a lot more information. We're going to give you an update on where we're at with the 2040 TPP. We were here in April. For those of you who remember from that committee of the whole, we gave a pretty long presentation on engagement we did earlier this year. So we're going to update you on everything we've done since then. Pretty thorough discussion on where we're at with policies and actions, and then some updates on what's coming next and some roles for you all to start reviewing our content. So in terms of overall, a couple of reminders on the TPP. It's an investment plan at its core. That's the primary federal role. It's also a guide for local planning, similar to the other plans under our state statute requirements. One caveat I always like to add at this stage, especially for newer council members, it is not a policy plan to guide how Metro Transit does business. It's often a confusing point here. It's a plan for all of the regional transportation providers in the whole region, including other transit providers, MnDOT, counties, cities, anybody who works on transportation. So when we look at it from that lens, it's not a place to try to put policies where we're giving Metro Transit specific direction. They have a lot of other places to do that. We do have a committee structure specific to transportation and also specific to the TPP development. For those who aren't familiar, we have the TAB, which advises the Met Council on all MPO-related roles, Metropolitan Planning Organization. They have a technical advisory committee and some subcommittees, and within the technical side, we have some working groups specific to topical areas like bike ped planning and transit planning, but also we have a technical working group specific to the TPP. They've been meeting monthly for the last 2 years approximately. It's somewhere around 40 members, a lot of different representation there from different agencies across the region. We also have an advisory work group that has 4 Met Council members from here, and then it has a number of members from TAB, and then a few additional representatives from transit providers and state government representatives, like MnDOT and MPCA. And so they've been meeting monthly as well for the majority of this and helping give us overall policy direction. Deb and Sue, I think, were at the meeting last Friday where I gave this essentially the same presentation. Diego was there too. So they're going to see this again, unfortunately, but it's a really good update on kind of the comprehensive status of where we're at with the TPP. So in terms of coverage on the TPP, it's always important to remember, like, what are we talking about? You know, are we talking about the sidewalks in front of your street? A little bit, but more so it's about major investments in a regional transportation system. Things like principal arterials, you know, your major highway and freeway investments, transit ways, you know, regional bikeways. We do coordinate with the park system on that kind of stuff. You know, system level guidance for how we implement a transit system, you know, not getting into the business of how you run it, but more how you plan for it, how you make system level decisions. And then also providing strategies for advancing regional outcomes. So we can give direction to our regional partners to advance regional outcomes, even in their local projects. You know, through our funding programs, through our incentives, through the various roles as a federal transportation management organization, we can give direction to local stakeholders on their projects. But more so, we focus on big investments in the region. In our schedule, we are in the middle there in the green. We've been writing. We actually started writing our TPP about, 6 months ago now. We have, I would say, about 80% of it drafted already. So it's starting to be reviewed primarily with technical partners right now. And the next step is to start releasing it to policymakers like the council and TAB for their review of draft documents. That, of course, is all leading up to the comment period and formal public comment release this fall. Just to give you a sense for what we've done in the last 2 years, you know, we did an assessment of the regional transportation system. We have a nice online tool that you can navigate. It's actually linked in the file online if you wanted to look at that. We've been doing a lot of studies. A lot of the work that we do between transportation policy plans is we dive into issues in more detail. We look at topics for new policy opportunities, new investment opportunities, and there's a few examples listed there. We did a lot of engagement, and that link on that one is to the presentation I gave to you all in April of last year, where we did a bunch of listening sessions with local governments and with community stakeholders in the spring of last year and winter, and that really helped inform the objectives that we have in the TPP. Based on all that, we started to draft objectives, policies, and actions, all kinds of work that we're going to talk more about. Then we started developing funding assumptions. I'm sure you're all aware 2023 was a big session for basically a lot of areas, but transportation in particular got a huge amount of investment authorized by the state. So we really had to refocus and incorporate some of those new changes into our outlook fiscally into the TPP in order to help prepare this plan. And kudos to Amy Venowitz for pulling in Jed for helping to pull all that together from our team. And then, of course, we've had all those meetings with our technical and advisory working group. So we've done a lot to prepare for where we've gotten to today. This is just to give you a sense for what we've drafted. I think it's over 300 pages so far in terms of content. We have a variety of chapters specific to each modal or investment area. And then we have chapters that are going to help link the regional goals that you all have endorsed, the 5 regional goals, to the TPP specifically. And I'll talk more about what the content for those look like. We started actually dealing this out to our technical partners in chunks. It's a lot to review at once, so we've been giving them a few pieces every month, starting in November. We generally would give them a couple of chapters, give them a month to review it, take their feedback, and then present themes at the next meeting as to what we heard, just to give them a sense for the kind of feedback we were getting. We've actually, across the first 3 sets of documents here, all the way through the aviation plan, the next 6 are out right now. We got over 1,400 comments from our technical partners. I would say 80% of them are nice wording suggestions, which were always helpful, and we love that. A lot more of them are, contextual, like, can you give us more information, help us understand this issue more. And so we'll spend the next few months before we release the draft trying to address some of those comments and that feedback. Right now, they're currently reviewing the documents at the bottom there, the policies and actions and the goal chapters. And I'm going to talk more about those. So just to kick off policies and actions, I think Bethany's going to start with this. She led the process, so she's the topical expert here, and turn it over to Bethany.
All right, thank you, Chair and members. We have been working on the policy development process for as long as I've been here, which is 2 years. We started internally with staff evaluating what was in the previous TPP and aligning around those regional goals and the shared structure. We then brought it to our technical working group, and they were able to provide feedback with what was working for them in the previous plan and what wasn't, and what potential gaps existed as we moved forward into the 2050 plan. We then stood up 8 policy development teams, and I'll talk about them a little bit more on the next slide. But they were made up of subject matter experts from across the region, from city, county, and state agencies, as well as some nonprofits, the University of Minnesota, and a couple others. They really helped provide the content and the direction for how we would reach our regional goals and our transportation objectives. And once they gave us the policies and actions guidance, we took it to a workshop format, and we invited agencies from across the region to come and review the draft work that those teams had put together. We had over 80 participants in those 3 workshops from a variety of agencies, and they really gave us great direction. And what that direction and that feedback was what we presented to our technical working group for review last month. These policy teams, there were 8 of them. 2 of the regional goals were separated into distinct policy teams because their subject matter expertise was quite different. Notably, safety and public health and wellness were split into 2 teams, and under the dynamic and resilient goal, we were split into 3 teams focusing on resilience, travel time, and reliability, and then transportation options and choices. You can see some of the represented agencies and stakeholders on the right side of the slide there. When we were developing the policies and actions, we really focused on the 4 key levers that we could pull to implement what we were proposing. The first being regional funding priorities, how we allocate funding to local agencies through our regional solicitation processes, comprehensive planning and project development guidance, technical assistance, and work program items, which will guide staff work for the next 5 years on exploring new topics.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the structure of the policies and actions section, and I'm going to go through this really quick. It's pretty similar to what Hilary was describing earlier, where there's different levels of ways we can implement our policies and actions. We can start by convening and providing technical assistance, just being that valuable partner, which is helpful, not always the most effective at getting change from some of our regional partners in terms of doing things differently to achieve our goals. We can start using incentives. In the transportation area, we have a $250 million program every 2 years called the Regional Solicitation. It's a great way to incentivize behavior from our partners. We can also use things like regulations. In some cases, we have to make sure that folks aren't doing something or are doing something if it won't impact or have harm on the system. So there's different scales that we can utilize in talking about how we apply those in policies and actions to partners that are willing, they're along with us for the ride, whereas others that might be like, we're not sure about this. So just a different way to think about it when you're reviewing the content. This is the actual snippet from the chapter. We talk about the goal. All of our policies and actions are nested under one particular goal. The sections of each document have the objectives that we have for that particular goal specific to transportation. And then it has a table that shows the policies, of which we have something around 35 total, and then individual actions underneath each policy with the roles for the different stakeholders called out. We have our traditional stakeholders that are implementing transportation. We have some space for other agencies like parks, maybe sometimes have a role, or the university. And so we call those out specifically as needed. The other thing I would note is we have various tags, and this is probably going to be turned into some sort of icon in the actual final document, but to help our partners understand where we're giving direction to some of our key roles. 2 key roles that we call out are the regional solicitation, policies that are going to give direction to how we invest as a region and as the council through the MPO process. And then we have a separate tag for comprehensive planning requirements. If we're asking something to happen in a comp plan, we're saying here is an action that's going to point to that. And then similar to what Emmett was talking about earlier, we have work plan items. Those are things we're going to do more research on in the future. So they're kind of commitments to future work, and we called those out as well. So that's the general structure of the document. As we go through this, very similar to the last 2 presentations, just some things to think about. Are there areas where you think we're going in a good direction? We always like positive feedback. Are there any concerns about existing approaches or lack of approach, new approaches in any new areas? Is there something you've heard about when you've been engaging that you just want to point out that you're not seeing reflected in where we're headed? And then are there any current, are there any current TPP approaches that you think we should rethink or refocus? So with that, we're going to tag team this. Bethany's going to start with the first one.
All right, so our first area is not actually tied to any regional goal. It is a foundational policy to guide all of our work. And there are 3 key policies in this section, data and plans, so making sure that we are updating data and analysis and being good stewards of the data that we have already produced. Proactively plan for discretionary grant programs to help the region achieve the funding that they need to deliver on the transportation objectives. And then asset management, so moving away from a worst first or solely based on the condition of the infrastructure to use more of the regional goals and indicators within that prioritization process. And I'm gonna skip past some of the similar and removed or replaced so we can make sure we get into some of the good content here. Under the equitable and inclusive goal, some of the new approaches are to encourage agencies to go beyond the minimum requirements for infrastructure in the Americans with Disabilities Act, so using principles of universal design. Also focusing on gentrification and displacement from transportation investments. And we have a specific policy to repair harms and negative impacts from past highway investments. And then a new process to use community assessments to understand who lives around your transportation project, who they are, what types of communities, what they need, and what those cultural impacts are, so that our transportation projects can better reflect the communities that they are in. Within Healthy and Safe, again, we split this into 2, so we do focus on transportation safety specifically. A big area of emphasis is the safe systems approach, which focuses on reducing fatal and serious injury crashes by incorporating design guidance that acknowledges that humans make mistakes. So really moving to a new approach. We also set guidance on bicycle and pedestrian safety specifically, as well as facilitating the new approaches to safety and security on transit that you all are familiar with. Within public health, this is relatively new to transportation as a specific approach. We are focusing these public health and wellness policies on 3 key areas. So minimizing health impacts, so focusing on air and noise pollution and emphasizing features like green assets for urban heat island effect. access to essential destinations, which are highly localized and reflect different cultural needs. So this is primarily a work program item. And then placemaking, again, incorporating cultural identity into your transportation projects.
So,
I have a question, Bethany, under our region is equitable, inclusive, page 18. So, under the new approaches category, you're adding more information and specifics about people with disabilities and the impacts. But that doesn't show what the existing approaches are, so there's existing approaches as well, right?
Yes. So we do currently, well, it is federal law that agencies need to make progress on ensuring that their infrastructure is accessible. We want to encourage agencies to go beyond those minimum requirements to make sure that it is incorporating more than just the minimum, to be more inclusive of different abilities.
Okay, thank you.
all right, so I'm going to talk about two topics under, or three topics under our dynamic and resilient. Sorry, I'm screwed up here. There we go. So the first topic is reliability and resilience. And want to clarify the first objective on the left there is that we have infrastructure and services that withstand and recover quickly from natural and human-caused disruptions. You might ask, we talk about resilience under climate change a lot. Well, in transportation, we have resilience in a lot of different areas. So we have a resilience objective under this goal, and that is focused on more than just the impacts of climate change, though there are some relationships there. So in terms of areas of new approaches in this topic area, resilience is a big area of focus. The 2040 TPP had some language around this, but I think our understanding of the impacts of different changing environments has become much stronger. And so we have a lot more to say about how we can identify and implement mitigation for impacts related to climate, but also just minimizing disruption of non-recurring delay from weather, from security or incidents like traffic crashes. Those are all sources of unreliability and a lack of resilience in our system that we want to try to address. From the reliability standpoint, we've historically had a lot of strategies. You can see similar to past approaches. We have a lot on reliability. One of the areas of new focus is being more strategic about how we invest in the highway mobility and congestion relief, trying to focus on the areas that have the greatest reliability challenges and delay challenges. And so shifting away from policies that might be perceived as open-minded or open-ended highway mobility investment to really focusing it down. And we actually have specific actions that state, what is the level of congestion we expect in order for it to be considered a regional need. And then on the freight perspective, we actually are just completing a pretty elaborate freight study that talks about how e-commerce data is changing. A lot more people are ordering stuff online, especially since the pandemic started, and the impacts that has for communities and trying to provide some additional direction there. Things like micro hubs where you can have different distribution tactics for